Yes, a warm welcome also from me. Thanks a lot for having me. Thanks a lot for coming here and lending me your attention for the next half an hour, where I'm going to present to you our public money, public code campaign. No worries, I'm going to come back to the comic later. But before we start with the topic, let me tell you who am I. I'm Alex. I'm a professional software developer here in Zurich. For approximately 3 years now, I have been a supporter of the Free Software Foundation Europe, which is a title you can buy for 60 euros a year. And for the same amount of time, I've also been a member of the local group Zurich of the Free Software Foundation Europe. Now, what is the Free Software Foundation Europe? The Free Software Foundation Europe is a charity that empowers users to control technology. It's a non-profit and non-governmental organization. Despite being legally set up as a German association, it is a truly European organization with active local groups in Spain, France, the United Kingdom, the Netherlands, Germany, Switzerland, Austria, Italy, and Poland. We're celebrating our 20th anniversary this year. Nonetheless, we're going strong as ever with a lot of activities, mainly focused on raising public awareness of free software, of advocating for policy on free software, and on providing legal support for free and open source software projects. I'm happy and honored to be able to present to you one of the biggest campaigns we've been running so far, namely the Public Money, Public Code campaign. But before we dive into that, I'd like to make sure that everyone knows what free software is. I have high hopes in this audience that you can very quickly tell me what free software is. Any takers? Go ahead.
Software you don't have to pay for?
Often, but not necessarily the case. Yes?
Free software is more like every user can be able to contribute to software itself.
Yes, that's one characteristic of it. But there's more. Or there's a more formal definition of it.
Quite often open source.
It is practically always open source. Well, the definition of free software, or software, is free once it provides users with 4 central freedoms. The first one is that the software is free to use, so you're free to use the software as you see fit. There's no restrictions, whether it is license payments, geographical limitations. Nothing prohibits you from using the software as you see fit. Then the second freedom is that you're free to study the code. That requires that the code is publicly available. And you're also free to modify that code as you see fit, so that it does your computing as you want it. The third freedom is that you're free to distribute copies of the original program without any limitations. And the fourth freedom is that you're also free to redistribute the modifications that you personally make to that software, to that piece of software. And these freedoms or rights are enshrined in a legal document called a free software license, an open source software license, a free and open source software license, you name it. Now, what is the Public Money, Public Code campaign? I personally like the naming of the campaign a lot because it is quite intuitive what we mean, but still to make it very precise, the goal of the Public Money, Public Code campaign is to have legislation which requires that publicly financed software developed for the public sector be made publicly available under a free and open source software license. If it is public money, it should be public code as well. Now, why do we want this kind of legislation? What reasons do we have for making such demands? Well, there are a whole bunch of them, a multitude. I'll start with economic reasons. The most obvious one is that public administrations would be able to save taxes by avoiding to pay recurring license fees. But it continues. So take, for example, two Swiss cities, St. Gallen and Lucerne. They're approximately of the same size, same language area. They have the same federal jurisdiction. The cantonal regulations and municipal regulations might, of course, differ, but still a host of tasks on these cities is going to be exactly the same. If each city were to, obviously many services will be provided and supported by software. So imagine a scenario where every city goes about implementing the same kind of software anew for themselves. Whether it is that they're buying it or whether it is that they're developing it, it's a completely inefficient and it's a waste of public resources. So by having a free software and open source solution, we could replace duplicated code with a collaborative approach. Then, by forcing public administrations to use free software, public administrations can avoid vendor lock-in, whether it is through hidden switching costs, whether it is just through an omnipresence of a certain software product, whether it is licenses that are handed out for many years, whether it is since that's the only vendor that can provide support. By switching or by relying on a free software solution, the code is accessible to everyone, literally everyone. Everyone who has an understanding of it can contribute and improve the code. So there's a major shift away of power from the vendor towards the user. And the public administrations in Switzerland are going to be in full control of their digital infrastructure. Hand in hand with the previous point comes that free software is able to break monopolies. Typically, those vendors have a lot of power. If they're the only provider, they become a quasi-monopolist. All of this is eliminated as soon as you have literally everyone in this room could go about and contribute to a free software project used by the Swiss public administration. And also, which is an important economic thing, and I don't want to forget to mention it, by sharing or by using free software, the reliance on big tax-avoiding software giants is going to be decreased, and instead can be replaced by, or you can channel funds into small and mid-sized enterprises in the region. The city of Barcelona is doing that very successfully. 70% of the IT budget goes to these kind of companies. Now, for the social aspects, where free software is just superior to proprietary one, most simply, you can actually rely on that the software is doing what it claims to do. There's no need for trust involved anymore. So you can most certainly be sure that there are no backdoors, simply because the transparency of it would make them obsolete. Users of that software will most likely gain privacy. They will not be constantly snooped upon. What goes under analytics in the industry. And also important, users of free software are not just software consumers, but they actually become part of a community where they're involved in reporting bugs, where they're involved in requesting features, where they might even be involved in fixing things and improving stuff. And it would be disrespectful to ETH if I wouldn't mention technological reasons for why free software is just superior to proprietary ones. If you don't want public administrations to end up in walled gardens, or what is also euphemistically known as ecosystems, you have to force them to use free and open source software so that you can ensure adherence to open standards, to make sure that software is interoperable across time, across different programs, so that it is possible to switch in case something new and better comes around. So this is a major point. It ties somewhat back into an economic argument, but it's also technological. And free software is just the much more innovative approach to software. While in many cases, a dominant market force who has a program which is omnipresent and proprietary doesn't need to innovate anymore, simply because the switching costs as a society are just so large that they could just sit back, count cash, and do nothing when it comes to developing the software. Not the case with a competitive approach like free software. Now, you might say, yeah, Alex, you're like this guy from the Free Software Foundation Europe. Obviously, you're biased. You're going to tell us, you're going to over-exaggerate things, the advantages of free software. Well, I have the Swiss Ministry of Finance to back me up. So I'm going to quote from some guideline that they have released in 2019. There's a chapter on the potential of free software in public administrations. And the quotes are going to be in German because the document is in German, but I'm going to translate it on the fly. So it says that by means of free software, one could realize reduced costs through cooperation with other users, reduced dependence on the software vendor, open standards and high interoperability, security and trust through transparency, swift innovation and integration, and the list could go on. I didn't want to complete the slide, and it basically is just mirroring what I mentioned on the slide earlier. So why am I here today then? What gives? Why do I have to have this talk and present to you the Public Money, Public Code campaign if the Swiss Ministry of Finance agrees with my previous arguments? Well, so let's start with the good. So there are a lot of public institutions in Switzerland which are using free, libre, and open source software. That's what the abbreviation stands for. One example is OneGovGather, which is used by the cantons of St. Gallen, Zug, and Appenzell-Innerrhoden as a document and records management program. I don't have the details there, it's just like what they advertise. The source for this presentation is available as a Git repository. There you have the link to the source code also of that software project. Then there's Kaluma, which is a software which is developed by a Swiss company. It's a collaborative form editing and workflow service, which amongst others is used by the cantons of Schwyz and Uri for managing their building permit applications, which is a process which involves many different parties. It's an iterative process with applications, approvals, feedback, cycles, and so on. And Kaluma helps the participants to digitalize this process. Few quotes from the responsible manager in Uri, Paul Walker. with regard to the open source approach of Kaluma. The freedom to develop where it is necessary. For that, you absolutely need open software. The sooner the cantons realize that free and open source software is the best way, the better it will be for these cantons. And my last example for public institutions using free Libre open source software is going to be the city of Lucerne, which is using Decidim, a digital platform for citizen participation, to power dialogLuzern.ch. On that website, citizens of Lucerne can give feedback to the city on city projects. They can present their organizations, they can post events, basically enabling a healthy city life, public active city life, without using software platforms like for example Facebook or whatnot. Then public institutions in Switzerland also release free Libre and open source software. 10 years ago, there was an interesting case where a Swiss federal court released its court case management system as free software, and it was immediately faced with backlashes from a proprietary software vendor who developed a court case management system itself and who motivated politicians to decry this move, as they claimed that this is an interference of the state in the marketplace. And this caused like a legal debate. And as a somewhat of a response, the canton of Bern in 2014, if I'm not mistaken, put it into cantonal law that the public administrations of the canton of Bern are allowed to release their own software as free software. So they provided a legal basis. That's basically what this German text says. Soon, hopefully, we might see a very similar passage in a federal law. It's currently in discussion. It's the Bundesgesetz über den Einsatz elektronischer Mittel zur Erfüllung von Behördenaufgaben. If you feel like reading that and following that, feel free. But yeah, I'm hopeful that this will pass and that even on a federal level, it is very clear that this is obviously legal. Now, what is an example of a Swiss public institution releasing free software? So the Swiss Geoportal, I discovered that during my research for this talk. This website is amazing. It's such a detailed card with like a wealth of information, like hiking trails, even closures of hiking trails, like mineral deposits all over Switzerland, obscure things like tank movement routes of the military, I don't know. So if you ever feel like organizing a hike or some bike ride or I don't know what, some research, this is a good place to start. Everything from the web viewer to the API is freely available, so you are free to use, study, share, and improve it if you wish. Then yes, the COVID-19 tracing and certificate apps, I think we can all agree that we'd rather live in a world where they were not necessary. Nevertheless, we have to deal what we are in, and I'm happy to see that these applications are available under free software license. I'm also happy to see them as builds available in the F-Droid store, which is a store, Android app store for free software. I'm happy that from the very beginning it was very clear that these apps, if they're ever going to be released, are going to be released as free software, because the administration thought this is very necessary for people to trust these programs, to use them then. And given their mediocre success, let's put it this way, just imagine what would have happened if these were proprietary apps, how much people would have trusted them with sensitive data like the locations or health status. But not all is great in Switzerland. There are plenty of examples where public institutions fuck up majorly. The Justitia 4.0 project and the inclusion of the platform Justitia Swiss is one of these examples. So there are many problems with this project, but in the tender specification it has been released towards the end of August, I think, or like 2 months ago. Basically excludes or prevents the platform from ever being released as free software. I mean, theoretically there's still a possibility, but this just shows where we're at with the understanding of what software has to look like for the public administration. Another example is just the prevalence of proprietary software in educational institutions. This is, again, just one out of many sad examples. The pandemic has just kind of accelerated this. In my opinion, educational institutions are places which are supposed to be open, which are supposed to be there to tinker, which are supposed to be places where you can experiment, where you can look under the hood. And then, seemingly, educational institutions in Switzerland have no better approach of doing that than providing tools which are the exact opposite of everything an educational institution should stand for. And again, the fact that now even the smallest members of our society, young school children, are being taught to and accustomed to proprietary software is just one of the worst things that can happen. They're going to grow up as a generation which thinks this is normal and this is just the way it's supposed to be. So, how can we summarize the relationship of public institutions in Switzerland and free and open source software? I come back to the document that I cited earlier from the Swiss Ministry of Finance of free software in the administration. So there are some classifiers here in the document on the very top, at the very beginning of the document. And in the part on bindingness, it says it's a recommendation. And that might be a start, but it's most certainly not enough. We want a requirement put into legislation that software in the administration has to be released under free and open source software license. So, where do we continue from here? What can we do? First thing, you can sign our open letter. It has already been signed by more than 30,000 individuals and 200 organizations, among them organizations like the Open Source Initiative, Mozilla, KDE, Debian, the Tor project, the Chaos Communications Club, several regional administrations. So you'll most definitely be in good company. But to really make an impact, you should let public institutions know, be it schools, be it universities, be it libraries, be it public offices. Why? An example from the Spanish province of Asturias will illustrate. There, a group of hacktivists reached out to the regional parliament of Asturias, talked to various political parties represented in that parliament, and convinced them to sign our open letter as well. this motion does not have a legally binding status. It's just like a show of intent and symbolic in some way. Nevertheless, one of the members of that hack lab pointed out that the major advantage or positive result of their actions was that for the first time a lot of politicians understood what free software is. And it's important to remember that politicians and other decision makers are also just human beings who have to deal with a lot of stuff on everyday life. And while some might obviously be under the influence of powerful proprietary software vendors, through lobbyism, through other kinds of dependencies, previous jobs, whatnot, most are just too busy and ignorant about the issue of free software in public administrations. So it's our job, for people like me, hopefully like you, who care about this, to point the problems in the current approach out to them and provide suggestions for them. And finally, you can be a good ambassador for our cause by leading by example. That means stop using proprietary software yourselves. There's a whole world of powerful applications out there waiting for you to be explored, giving you all the freedoms you could wish for. And with that advice, we've come to a full circle. While I might sound like that guy, and I certainly share his concern for the digital infrastructure that we're building today, I don't want to end up being vindicated by events in the future, and much rather see the public money, public code campaign have an impact right now. And in good spirit of the free software movement, your contributions are always welcome. Thanks a lot. Yes, please.
You mentioned something about federal law in Switzerland. Is this something that is, are they doing this in Parliament at the moment, or did I confuse something?
Come again, what did I mention with federal?
Federal law in Switzerland?
Yes, so there is a federal law in discussion now, which would put like a passage like you've seen on what the Canton of Bern did into federal law, that all federal institutions who own rights to software are allowed to share them openly under free and open source software license. This is the federal law that is in discussion. It is not in place yet. The draft has this passage there, but that's about it.
So that's in Parliament?
Yes, it's somewhere being discussed. Yes, please. Good question. So the question was what the status on these kind of motions or developments is in the European Union. So the Free Software Foundation Europe, I mean, it has some paid employees, and they are heavily involved, obviously, with lobbying in Brussels as well. This is where the center of power is, kind of. They have an ear there. I mean, the biggest German party, well, not anymore, second biggest by now, thank God, has actually decided in their party program that this is basically exactly what we mentioned or what we desire, that everything that is developed for the public sector or by the public sector is released under free and open source license, but that's just text. The only country which has actually put into place a law like the one that the public money, public code campaign demands is Bulgaria. You had a question as well?
Yeah, the law that is discussed in Parliament is that just are allowed to publish the code, or you must publish it?
It's just the allowance. It's not a. It's again kind of a recommendation, optional thing. It's not a requirement. No.
If you ever, I mean, I don't know how much you know about Swiss government now, but we have this initiative with everything, which is like 100,000 signatures to try to put something in federal law. I think that would be a bit overkill to try and do it that way. So the other way is through Parliament. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if there is any movement, or are there people who try to do this?
So the question is whether we use like the instruments of the direct democratic instruments that are provided to the citizenship in Switzerland to kind of implement our campaign in the constitution, in that case, in Switzerland. Not to my knowledge at the moment. I mean, we are currently standing at 30,000 signatures worldwide. So, like 100,000 is maybe a stretch, but yes, so also, in my opinion, it might be simpler to convince the parliament directly. It's a smaller group of people who might immediately see the benefits of what we're telling them, and it goes directly into actionable law, while like an initiative would put it into the constitution, and then you'd still need laws putting that into practice. Yes?
What's the like in what sectors of public in IT infrastructure are you demanding this FLOSS applications? Would it also be in, for instance, like cybersecurity, that the code that is used there, that is obviously also publicly funded, is made so that it complies with the FLOSS idea?
In that particular example, I would say yes. If it's a cyber defensive mechanism, you anyways want that code to be like the concept of security through obscurity is just so flawed that it's not going to get us anywhere. So you'd rather publish it and then have people review that, because most of the people who might be looking at it will not have the intent of harming the digital infrastructure of Switzerland, but much rather rely on it to be functional. So you want that to be as robust as possible. Where you might argue it's a little different is when it comes to like nuclear proliferation. Then you might say, yes, well, this enables hostile actors to gain knowledge necessary to build weapons of mass destruction. This is something where you could argue, but in the case of cyber defense, I would say that security for obscurity is just not the correct approach. Thanks a lot. Was happy to. Yeah, thanks.
Yes. So another one round of applause for Alexander.
Thanks a lot for having me.